On today's show, an episode dedicated to our man, our king, our legend, our Lord and Savior, Fernando Tatis Jr., taking a look at his career over the last 5 years, projecting where he could end up in 2025, the highs and lows of said career, and the lows being genuinely becoming a maligned player in baseball, community discourse, and all of that. We're going to talk about all of it, so let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, March 13th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPNO, for updates on my work and some of my work. Go check it out at Just Baseball. I work on the newsletter and write about the Padres and other stuff. And I also host a podcast called Baseball versus the World. If you want to see or hear my voice, whatever you want, go check that out. It's general baseball, evergreen topics. This next coming week, we're going to be doing predictions. We're going to be doing the best baseball movies. We're going to be doing all sorts of stuff, including the time I felt when I realized I was washed. That's right. All sorts of stuff coming on the Baseball versus the World podcast. Today's episode, guys, though, we are talking about Mr. Fernando Tatis Jr. And look, it's actually, it's funny because in my quest to kind of differ content, I've almost avoided it. And remember, when I did my bold predictions episode a couple weeks ago, one of the things that I talked about was like, I didn't want to do the bold prediction where I'm like, Fernando Tatis Jr. MVP. That's not that bold. That's not that exciting, right? Like, it really isn't. You know why? Because he's literally finished third in MVP before, and he's been an electric player. Everybody knows who he is, so that's not that bold. And I think that over this quest of trying to be different, I actually haven't done an episode just talking about Tatis in a long time. Weird, right? So we're going to be doing that today, and we're going to be talking about his career from the beginning and just kind of how that got us to today, because Fernando Tatis Jr.'s career has been very kind of, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster in a lot of ways, right? Like, this is kind of a player that has run the gambit of not just being a great player, not just being an exciting player, not just being an exciting and great player on a team that hasn't had one for a very long time, or at least, let's say, a historically, let's say, irrelevant in the grand scheme of things baseball organization. And it's the fact that he's a Padre, you know, bias obviously with that, but it's also the off-field stuff, how he went from being one of the most beloved players to being a little bit in the middle and a little bit loved again, and then having an insane 2024 playoffs, and then also people wondering, is he still going to be good again? Not just the bad faith people who are like, he stinks now, but people who in good faith are like, is he going to be good still? And I think that there's a lot of questions there. I actually think he's been a fascinating player in many, many ways. And let's start with 2019. Right? 2019 was when I was not covering the Padres just yet, for what it's worth. Full disclosure. I had not been covering the Padres in 2019. I was following them, right, very vaguely. It was actually like coming up on, you know, I just graduated college at the time, and I'd been watching a little bit of Padres games just because I liked Manny Machado, frankly. And I thought, okay, that's a team that if you're just a sports fan like I was, and I know this sounds like a bias because I now cover the Padres and they're my team, but I really do think that objectively speaking, what the Padres were doing was a really interesting sports story. I know that like you won't get that take in mainstream sports places. You'll get it from podcasters and whatnot like me. But in general, I don't know how you couldn't be interested in a sport that historically is dictated so much by money. Right? So much by teams that want to spend, not necessarily the most, but spend a good chunk in order to win. Here was a team that never spent before. Here's a team that I last remembered that they wouldn't spend for Chase Headley after that insane second half he had in, what was it, 2016, 2017? I forgot which year. And then all of a sudden, here they are making all these crazy trades. One of my best friends from San Diego is like, I don't even care if they don't work. I just like that we're doing something for once instead of just relying on the promise of prospects down the road, right? And that's what loser organizations do oftentimes. And he was so excited about it. And then they signed Eric Hosmer. I was like, okay, fine. But in fairness, you know, Eric Hosmer, not universally believed to be a great player, right? Some people were like, oh yeah, he's pretty good. This could be a decent signing for them, but I don't know. No one really loved that contract when it came out. And then Manny Machado happens when I'm in college and everyone's like, what on earth is going on here? The Padres are legit like trying this. They're really, really trying to do this. And then, of course, you also have the fact that they had a rising farm system. But guys, I know this sounds crazy, but I'd heard that before, right? I'd heard before the rise of a farm system. Oh, it's a really good farm. And how many teams end up like that and only like 2 players are good and they didn't spend any money, so then they reset it again. Then Tatis comes along. And that's where what really happened, right? Is that 2019, he was a good player. He was a great player. In fact, he was probably like one of the Rookie of the Year people. The only thing is that he did get hurt. And that was a question about him, is whether or not he could stay healthy. He did not in 2019. But in just 84 games, this man had a three wins above replacement according to FanGraphs, a 151 WRC plus. It did not look like at all. Like maybe he got a little bit lucky on some of the batting average stuff. He hit 317 that year. That's the highest batting average he's had of his whole career. But he hit 22 home runs. He stole 16 stolen bases. He had 16 stolen bases. So I was starting to turn my head because aside from the numbers, I was just like, first of all, great name for a ball player, right? And number 2, I was like, watching highlights of this man tagging up from third base on an infield fly and scoring and all that stuff, right? Like, I think that's what it was. It was exciting. But still, I have seen players that are just good and they just end up that way. They don't transcend to this next level of being like my friends who only follow soccer, the NBA, and football, right? That they all of a sudden are like, yo, this Tatis kid is crazy. And that happens in 2020, at least in my opinion, right? 2020 was his coming out party, and it was because he was one of the best players in the sport that year. Yes, he fell off towards the end, which is why he missed out on the MVP award. I believe I think this is the Freddie Freeman MVP year, if I'm not mistaken, but he does finish 4th, right? This is a guy that was unbelievable. He had 17 home runs in 59 games. He had a decent amount of stolen bases at 11, and he was hitting them all at incredible times, 937 OPS. So it kind of proved that his rookie year wasn't just some mirage, right? Or at least it proved it to most people because all the metrics were like, you can't really fake the type of stuff that Tatis is doing. You just don't. And he was super exciting. He's hitting some big time hits. I remember the game, I believe this is the COVID season in 2020, that I believe it was like the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs, ties up the game against Colorado. And then he has this moment in 2020 in which, in the playoff series against the Cardinals, in which he has the crazy game along with Will Myers, the 2 home runs by him and 2 home runs by Myers. I think it was the stat was, and I don't know if it's still held, but it was like, there hasn't been a duo of teammates to hit 2 home runs in a single playoff game since like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. It was like crazy stuff, right? And one of them being the bat flip game, right? That was the other thing that happened. He was becoming a superstar. And also in 2020, forget the playoffs for a second, right? So I've just mentioned to you, it's stats, it's excitement, it's his look, it's his game, it's the way he plays, all that. But it's also the home run stuff. It's the fact that the bat flip became the literal cover of MLB The Show the following year. But it's also another thing that I thought was interesting, which is Fernando Tatis Jr., a lot of people might forget this. And maybe this is revisionist history on my part. Maybe this is a little biased on my part. But Fernando Tatis Jr. was one of the first players that kind of started to kill the unwritten rule thing. And what I mean by that wasn't that it was him. It was that this is a universally beloved player, right? Coming off an amazing 2019. His rookie season. Everyone's starting to talk about him. He goes viral on a couple clips on YouTube and all that. And then 2020 comes around. He proves that it was a fluke, right? He's making incredible plays. The Air Tatis stuff, all that whatnot. And just seeing plays you haven't seen before. The way he runs the base pass, dodging tags. And then hitting the 3-0 grand slam, which then caused a national discourse in mainstream sports media. Around the Horn, PTI, Colin Cowherd, the First Take, I'm pretty sure talked about it. And the fact that there was a universal condemnation of the Rangers, including from old heads, I think that was the result of Tatis at that point in his career being 150% approval rating. It was kind of the last one. I'm serious. Guys, think about it. When was the last time you really feel like you heard an unwritten rules sort of conversation, right? It was one of the best players in the league, best young players in the league that everyone liked watching. And I think that combination resulted in, let's just say it. Why not? I don't care if it's hyperbolic and whatnot. Fernando Tatis Jr. was the one who killed the unwritten rules discourse. That's right. And we should praise him for that always. But of course, that wasn't the end of his career. Because after this moment, things get a little bit weird and it gets a little bit inconsistent, but also great, and also a little bit down, and then really ugly, and then really great. And we're going to talk about that, guys, in just a minute. But first, we need to talk to you about one of our sponsors, and it is a new sponsor of this year's show. We always love that here at Locked On. That is a very important one, and it has to do with money. Because if you ever check your bank account, sometimes you wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And let me tell you, when I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Yeah, let me tell you guys, some of my orders, I'm like, my Lord Almighty, this is tough. I got to watch out for this. And Monarch helps you out with that all-in-one convenience. You don't have to juggle multiple apps as well. It's really great with managing money with your partner and whatnot. It's smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So what are you waiting for? Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's right, monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Monarch Money, go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back here thriving and vibing on segment number 2 of the Locked On Padres podcast. Your team every day. Remember to follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Feel free to check out those accounts. Send me messages on YouTube or whatever for the upcoming mailbag on Monday, because you won't be hearing me on tomorrow's podcast like that. No, because tomorrow's Fun Friday and I'll have a special guest on. But let's continue talking about Fernando Tatis Jr. Then comes 2021, which is a season that I think, has it become a tiny bit underrated, just a tiny bit? Because Fernando Tatis Jr. then once again follows up, now having been signed to the giant contract by the San Diego Padres, officially declaring him, this is one of the best players in the league. We want to keep you. We want you to retire as a Padre. And yeah, I mean, when you give a young player, after just basically 1.5 seasons and 1 full season in total games, when you give him a 14-year, $340 million contract, it's kind of like, yeah, like that says a lot. And he proved it, which is a big deal. In 130 games in 2021, Fernando Tatis Jr., as everybody remembers, was fantastic. He once again had an incredible WRC plus mark, this time of 158, eclipsing the 150 from years before that, and he finished with 6.8 wins above replacement, slashing 282, 364, 611, 42 bombs, 25 stolen bases. The guy was an absolute maniac all year. He had an expected weighted on base of 407. Like, he was just on a rampage, and he basically tinkered almost in every way with all the things we were worried about with him, except one thing, which was his defense. In 2021, he wasn't the best defensive shortstop. He had -6 defensive runs saved, but he was positive in outs above average, +2. And the previous year, he was +7 outs above average with 0 defensive runs saved, right? So I always thought that the complaint over Tatis's defense was extremely overrated at shortstop. Was he, Francisco Lindor? No. But Fernando Tatis Jr., the 2 things that happened for him that year is, number 1, the team fell apart, right? Actually, there's 3 things that happened. The team fell apart, and also it was that he had a lot of errors at the beginning of the year, and again, that's where the discourse started. But the reason that this started picking up is because he's famous, and it's easy for people to make jokes about Tatis not being able to play short and just throwing some of the highlights, even though the advanced numbers suggest this guy isn't necessarily a world beater, but he's perfectly fine at shortstop. And frankly, there are times when you might be even saying, well, Eric Hosmer didn't catch some of those throws, right? So maybe they wouldn't be errors and whatnot. Maybe if you had a little bit of a better first baseman, maybe he can make up for some of your little errors and whatnot. And errors are not a stat that are the be all and end all for defensive performance. They're just not, right? I'm more impressed by Tatis's arm strength and range personally. But anyway, the other thing that happened this year was that he finished 4th in MVP voting, which is great. He finished 3rd in MVP voting. I, for what it's worth, was a Harper, Tatis, Soto guy that year. The reason I put Soto last is because he had better numbers than them. I do think it matters that there wasn't a single Juan Soto at bat that year that actually mattered for the hierarchy of the league. Right? The Nationals were completely non-competitive. I think that matters. I like that baseball, unlike the other sports, that they won't be too much in the opposite direction, which is best player on best team, regardless of the fact that if you take off that best player, if that team still is first in the Western Conference, or second in the Western Conference, I should say. They go from first to third. Is that as big of a drop-off where you compare other players, if that player's on the team, they're a contender, and then if you take them off, they're out of the playoffs? That's what I like to use MVP. Who suffers more, right? Which team suffers more by not having that player on their team? That's what I like. But I do respect that baseball, it's sometimes I'm like, can we make it for someone whose season actually mattered, right? Like, there's been a couple Mike Trout years where I was like, I think Bregman should have got that one, actually. But I digress. I think that it was a perfectly valid finish by Tatis. And in fairness, he only played 130 games. If he stays healthy, I do think he might get the MVP award. Also, because if he stays healthy, the Padres maybe make the playoffs and don't collapse nearly as much. That team just died, and all their energy was gone once he was injured for a long stretch. It was rough, right? It was really, really rough. And the other thing about Tatis that year is, man, oh man, was it just really fun seeing him hit them home runs and seeing at that first half with the medallion and everything. And then came along 2022, which he was suspended for those who don't remember. He had the injury with his shoulder that he was finally starting to address, but more importantly, he was suspended for PEDs. And this is where everything really fell off, right? Let's now talk about the second act of Tatis, which is the suspension. And this has created an issue for a variety of reasons. He became the center of discourse for a lot of reasons in baseball. And, you know, his interviews, right? Like, he's a kid, don't get me wrong, especially at this time, right? But Tatis saying, like, when asked about the motorcycle crash, which I know that we're like, this is so many years back, but it's kind of crazy that we were at this point with Tatis, where as like a 22-year-old, right? 23-year-old, let's keep that in mind. He got into a motorcycle accident, he's hurt, and when asked about it, you know, the motorcycle accident, he said, which one? You know, like, and that just created like a big red flag of like, what is this bozo doing? Combine that with him and Manny Machado getting into it in the dugout, there was starting to be a little bit of a diva tag, I think, associated with Tatis. Unfairly or not, that was the reality. And then the suspension. And ever since then, people have been kind of waiting for Fernando to be back to his ultimate maximum supernova self. But what I will say is, over this time, and I've defended Tatis before, because frankly, I don't get annoyed when people call him a cheater. I just don't like it that fans almost always view that worse than some other things that players do in sports. You know what I mean? Where it's like, that's when people speak out, you know? I think that especially a good example of this was when Mike Clevenger was railing, like really spoke passionately about how annoyed he was with Tatis. I didn't, when he got popped for the PEDs, of course. I didn't mind the rest of the players getting mad. I thought it spoke volumes. That they were like, come on, dude. We just traded for Juan Soto. We're about to get you back. We have a real chance. And who knows if they go further, if they have a healthy Tatis that season. Because they already beat the Dodgers. Maybe they go farther. Maybe they can outmatch the Phillies. I don't know. We don't know. This is one of your best players and one of the best players in the sport. And the way everyone reacted, I had no issue with that. And I think that it spoke a lot of volumes, and they probably know, hey, this kid's great. He's super talented, but he's probably got to check it in a little bit. Maybe be not even humble, but just be more focused. You know what I mean? On the sport, I think, is what happened. And then Mike Clevenger's thing bothered me. That's where I'm going to bring this full circle, because Mike Clevenger's ripping him, and I'm like, excuse me, Mike Clevenger, weren't you the one that was like going out to clubs or strip clubs or whatever? And it was in the thick of the pandemic, which risks not only you getting suspended, but also for health reasons, including one of your teammates who literally had a heart condition, and Carlos Carrasco, I'm pretty sure. And you think you can talk about Tatis right now? That was the problem I had, and that's one of the problems I have with sports fandoms, when people really hone in on the PED thing, right? I've never seen other players, let's say in football, I never saw Ben Roethlisberger getting booed vociferously at non-divisional opponents. I don't mind if the Dodgers do it. It's division. They boo Tatis no matter what. We'd boo Mookie Betts no matter what. That's just what happens. But I've never seen that for certain other players, right? Who have done, in my opinion, things far worse. That doesn't mean that the Tatis thing, he's exonerated from it. I just wish we would keep the same energy around sometimes. But anyway, moving on. Then Tatis comes back in 2023, and he's a little bit of a disappointment, right, in terms of what we were expecting. But he was still a good player in 2023, right? Like, make no mistake about that. The rest of the team was bad. He didn't produce as much in high leverage as we would have hoped, but overall, 257, 322, 112 WRC plus, 4.1 wins over replacement, because he ends up going out and winning a platinum glove in right field. And that's what I want to talk about here, because unlike some other players in other sports, let's say John Morant as a good example, someone who was in the spotlight for weird personal conduct off field, didn't quite learn from it super. Tatis clearly following the 2022 fiasco, his teammates ripping him, the suspension, all that stuff. He gets the surgery and he's like, yes, sir, like, I'm doing anything. He moves down and wherever in the lineup. Bob Melvin talked about it. And I think Tatis deserves a lot of credit for that. That he's done nothing but try and rebuild and get back to that superstardom level, right? He didn't quite hit there as a player, but what I do love is he moved to right field off of shortstop, which he loved playing, and he was really bold about it, right? He was holding the plaque when he won I forgot what it was that he won. He was holding something, oh, he can't play shortstop, and he was holding something up, right? But in general, I thought that it was impressive, and he wins the Platinum Glove, multiple, I think it was 27 defensive runs saved, right, which is insane for a guy who hadn't been playing in the outfield, specifically 29 in right field and 11 outs above average. He was insane, and it was one of the coolest things, and that's what kept his WAR up. And then we had 2024, which is the most, where things get a little bit more complicated too. And then we're going to talk about my projection for Tatis heading into this next year. It's going to be a lot of fun, but first, one more word from one more of our sponsors. Folks, you've heard of them before. They're nice. They're yummy. They're fantastic. We love them very much on this show. And that is the wonderful world of wonderful pistachios. Folks, let me tell you, if you're trying to stay healthy and also have something that's really delicious, well, check into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. It is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help keep you feeling fuller longer. All that stuff. We love it. They've got no shells variety. They got different spicier flavors and whatnot for you. I personally like cracking open the nuts. And in general, as someone who's trying to be a little bit healthy lately, it's really nice to just have something that's there for you and kind of satisfies that urge and gives you the protein you need. So get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. And just like that, everybody, we're back here on Locked On Padres, everybody, thriving and vibing as always. Remember, at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, Twitter /X and Blue Sky for the mailbag. And just to follow me, frankly, I'd appreciate it. I like seeing the numbers go up. 2024 for Fernando Tatis Jr. was a little bit of a weird one because he was projected a lot higher. I think the hype was really through the roof because everyone said, well, the bat's going to be better. He had an expected weight on base of 364 and he finished with a 332. It's going to be better. The hard hit stuff was there. And breaking news, he's awesome in right field now. And then Tatis took a step forward in 2024. 276, 340 with a 492, slugging 135 WRC plus. So, okay, that's excellent. And only 3.2 wins above replacement. So why'd that happen? Well, it's kind of obvious. Number one, he missed games, only 102 games played, and this has always been a little bit of an issue for Tatis, right? This has always been a thing of health, whether it be the missed season, whether it be his rookie year, whether it be whatever it is. It's injury stuff. But then, his defense also wasn't nearly as good, right? That kind of carried him the previous year. In right field last year, he was 0 defensive runs saved and -1 outs above average, right? Like, he actually wasn't as good defensively. And I think that he could still be good. Don't get me wrong. But it was a huge downgrade from what we'd seen previously. In general, and then, by the way, here's the thing. What happens in this year is the offense was better and it started getting there eventually. That's what happened with Tatis as the season progressed in 2024. We started to see the superstar Tatis. The beginning of the season, not bad, don't get me wrong. But March and April, 117 WRC+. May, 109. And then June, 198 WRC plus. September, October, 140. So he was still a good player. But you started to see the MVP version of Tatis as we got farther into the season, but then he got hurt, right? So that was a big problem with his season. And I think all this coalesces into a very weird career. And then it ends with an incredible postseason performance, which in my opinion was the first time we really were like, I think superstar Tatis is back, because this is what superstars do. And I loved every second of it. You guys loved it. He was fantastic in the playoffs. Specifically, what was his OPS like? A bajillion? What did he have? He had an OPS of 1,500 in the 2024 playoffs, 423 average. He hit 4 home runs. He carried the Padres in a lot of ways. Like, he was excellent. Jackson Merrill as well. And it's for that reason, the playoffs combined with that we started seeing it as the season went along, I think it matters that he went through what he went through with the PEDs, with the shoulder, with the embarrassment, and just trying to figure things out. And frankly, other opposing pitchers got a lot more data on him, a lot more time to perfect and figure out how to attack him. I think that's what it was. And in general, that combines for, like I said, a really wild career. He's actually had a little bit of a baseball arc that is like what you might see on a Netflix baseball movie, right? Like, that's kind of what you would see. And I think that overall, he's still been very good. But there are some concerns, and that's where we get into 2025. Because personally, I think Tatis is being a little disrespected, a little bit, because of what I just mentioned with his numbers, because of what I mentioned with the playoffs. My thing is, yeah, but you guys really still want him, right? And that's not all just the celebrity factor, right? Yasiel Puig is a player that was like all celebrity factor and whatnot, right? And I get that. But with Tatis, I think that, yes, there are some concerns. His OPS overall has fallen by more than 100 points ever since the PED suspension. He has not been the exact same player. But you know what? He's starting to remind me a little bit of a Ronald Acuna Jr. I'm not just saying that because of nationality or anything like that. I'm saying it more that Ronald Acuna Jr. had the incredible first year, 142 WRC plus, 4.4 wins above replacement, just 111 games. Then he substantiated that a little bit more in 2019. 2020, he was great. He was also pretty good in 21, but we're waiting. When he's getting back to the projection, the superstar projection? And then he gets hurt in 2022. He's not as good, which is kind of what happened with Tatis in 23. And then the 9-win season that he put up, just an offensive freak show in 2023. He reminds me a little bit of that. They've also had similar moments of being kind of in the limelight for wrong reasons, not because Acuna did anything bad, but more like, Freddie Freeman telling him, yeah, I told him not to wear his hair that way, and, we don't have to go down that path. But that, the injuries, the getting hit intentionally, some of the stuff with how he leans over the plate, he's been a little bit of center of some drama too, so he's been reminding me of just the arc, I think, of Ronald Acuna. But here's the thing. With Tatis, I understand the OPS drop, but what I saw from the playoffs, what I saw at the end of the regular season, was him back at superstar level. Just because you're a superstar, not everyone's going to be Mike Trout, where they're just amazing every single year. But he still hits the ball as hard as ever. 99th percentile in hard hit rate, 92nd percentile in barrel rate, 97th percentile in average exit velocity. His expected slugging is a lot up. And what I love using, weighted on base. Right? I love using weighted on base as the initial marker for whether or not a player got extremely lucky. It doesn't tell you everything, right? Because some players are different. But with Tatis, this is the second straight year, 23 and 24, where his expected weighted on base was significantly higher than his weighted. In 23, it was 332, and then it was 364 expected. This past year, 359 and 387 expected. I think he's still got the ultimate hitting prowess, for sure. And I'm really excited about it because I think he's going to be awesome this year. Now, I'm not sure about his defense because it was a drop-off in terms of the advanced statistics with his defense. He had some bobbles in the outfield. He didn't quite get to the ball nearly as quickly as he did in 2023. But overall, what I'm looking at here is to compare to Acuna. If he's a little worse, let's say he's worse than what Ronald Acuna Jr. did offensively that season, right? And what he did offensively was and it's not just that he stole a lot of bases, right? Like, let me be clear, that's not all that Ronald Acuna Jr. did that year, because I know a lot of people like to nitpick him and say that he was stat padding a little bit with the 70 stolen bases. It was that, but it was also that he had a 171 WRC plus. Let's say Tatis is a 145 WRC plus this year. And if he can do what Ronald Acuna has shown us that he can't do, which is defense, we're talking about a 7-8 win player here. That's what Tatis could absolutely be this year. He could be an MVP player. I don't think he's going to win the MVP because Shohei, unfortunately, is a demigod. But overall, I can absolutely see it. And there are some reasons that I'm excited for that, right? So again, if he's just a little bit, kind of worse than Acuna offensively, but still great, he more than makes up for it with a strong defensive season. I think he can do that. And another thing about Fernando Tatis Jr., aside from, by the way, I saw the Vladdy rumors of him asking for $500 million or declining that. I'm like, that 340 looking really good right now for the Padres. That's the thing about when you spend big on the young player that you know is going to be a star, is that it might hurt at the beginning, but you're going to be like, oh, wow, like this is actually a pretty good deal for us overall in the long run. At least we hope, right? But anyway, with Tatis, there's a few things. Number one, there's been some tinkering that we've seen in spring training that I think is really interesting. He tinkered with his swing and his overall approach, and it seems like he's adding a little bit more patience, a little bit more waiting to see, and not swinging as wild as he was before. Let me be clear. Him swinging wild is still like a top 20 player in baseball. Don't get me wrong, and possibly top 10. But it seems like he's removed a bit of a leg kick. He's setting himself a lot sooner. He's not wagging the bat nearly as much before the pitch comes in. He's got a wider stance. He just, in general, doesn't have as much going on. So you combine all that with just my feeling of you're not going to underperform your metrics every single year like this. You just don't hit as much as him. The only thing that I will say is, yes, the walk rate has decreased. This is one thing for Tatis. He's always been going to be a high batting average guy, don't get me wrong. But these past few years, he has declined in his walk rate. 11.4% in his nearly MVP year, right, in 2021, then 8.3 in 2023, and then 7.3 in 2024. Maybe that's what the new approach is for. Maybe he's trying to make up for the fact that, all right, I still want to hit for a lot of power. I still want to get on base and whatnot. He's still going to get on base and draw some walks because while he has declined in walk rate, he's made up for it for the fact that he's not striking out nearly as much. That's a big deal, right? The significant decline in the strikeout rate, I think, matters, and that's what offsets a little bit of the walk rate, right? He had a 29% K rate his rookie year, 23, and then 28% in 21. So he's made up for it a little bit in the fact that he's not striking out as much. But for me, nothing has fallen off too gigantically. And I think that he can be still an on-base guy. I think he can get a 350 on base. I think he could hit 280. I think he's going to hit like 35 home runs this year. I'm really high on him. But I also want to emphasize that it's totally valid that people are saying, are we sure he's a superstar? He's a star. But is he a superstar? And superstar has the connotation of being Shohei, Mookie Betts. I'm trying to think of other players right now. Freddie Freeman, to name some Dodgers. Is he going to be Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, Bryce Harper level? Like, what exactly is he going to deliver us this year? Because this is a big season for him. So while I do think he's being disrespected a little bit, I think people are like, oh, he ain't the same no more. It's the PEDs, man. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's more complicated than that. And when you're hitting the ball as hard as him, like, what did the PEDs do? Make him see better? No, don't answer that for me. I actually don't know what PEDs really do. But I think that overall, he made a mistake and has had a wild career. But I think the new approach, I think all the hard hit data, he hit the ball harder than he did at times last year than he did in his near MVP year in 21. What I see here is a big season from Tatis, and I think the Padres are expecting it too, and I think you should as well. I think there's a chance he doesn't run as much. Stolen bases, maybe he tries to keep himself healthy. And that's another thing, by the way. They said he was only operating at 60% with his leg last year. I think we could have ourselves a special season, man. It almost feels like we're due, right? It's been a while. But regardless, he's going to be great and is going to be the reason to watch the Padres. He always is. And you have Jackson Merrill too. And if you get anything out of left field, this Padres outfield might want to be one of the best in the National League. I'm not even kidding. That sounds crazy, but just wait. Just wait, folks. But that's basically all I have to say about Fernando Tatis Jr., everybody. I'm really excited for his season. I think that he has had a wild career, and I think it's time for him to jump back into being the superstar face of the league. That, in my opinion, the only one who has the ability to do that more than him is Shohei Ohtani, in my opinion. Tatis just had the personality. He has the swagger, the excitement. I don't know if there's any other player that has that with the exception of Tatis. Aaron Judge is fun. Juan Soto as well. But I think it's kind of those four. I think it's Shohei, Soto, Tatis, and Judge. And I think Judge doesn't have the personality that carries as much. So I'm really excited to see what happens this season with Fernando Tatis Jr. But I want to know what you guys think about Fernando Tatis Jr. Is it over? Is he just going to be a great player and not a super duper star? Or are we fools for ever doubting that this upcoming season isn't going to be just that? Let me know in the comments, guys. And let me know for Monday's show for the mailbag. But that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, guys. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow myself on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, also on Blue Sky as well. Tomorrow, we're doing a little bit of Fun Friday with my buddy Miller Thomas, talking about fantasy baseball perspective on all of the Padres and D-backs players to looking out for, maybe some general fantasy rules as well. Don't worry, even if you don't play fantasy, it'll be fun just to talk about some of these players and where we're ranking them and whatnot. It still has a correlation to real life, but that'll be a fun one, so stay tuned for that. And until that next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.